Now, that was not a controversial ruling. This is a principle the Supreme Court, as I indicated, has repeatedly recognized. Here, as just one example, is the Supreme Court in the case of Norwood versus Harrison in 1973, stating very simply, Congress, quote, may not induce, encourage, or promote private persons to accomplish what it is constitutionally forbidden to accomplish. For more than half a century, courts have held that government threats can turn private conduct into state action. This is a crucial principle. Government threats can turn private conduct into state action. So when the Congress or the executive branch tells Facebook or Spotify or Google or Twitter, we are not satisfied with how you're censoring, we want more censorship, and if you don't censor more, we will pass laws or use our regulatory power to punish you, that becomes state action. That is the state censoring in exactly the way that the First Amendment prohibits it from doing so. Now, this is a principle that appears over and over, and it was observed by this very important Wall Street Journal op-ed in January 11th of 2021 by the Wall Street entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy and Yale law professor Judd Rubenfeld, the title of which was Save the Constitution from Big Tech. And they argued that while big tech is excessively and aggressively censoring the internet in a way that is dangerous and poses serious menaces to our ability to have free discourse, what is often overlooked is that it is the government forcing them or requiring them or incentivizing them or pressuring them to do so. This is what they wrote, quote, using a combination of statutory inducements and regulatory threats, Congress has co-opted Silicon Valley to do through the back door what government cannot directly accomplish under the Constitution. Now, the most important case on this matter that for me settles the entire controversy and should really have people up in arms about what the Democratic Party is doing is this one from 1964, Bantam Books versus Sullivan. It arose out of a bookstore in Rhode Island that was displaying books that members of the local zoning board thought were inappropriate to be sold and displayed. They didn't like the books. And they began harassing the bookstore, demanding that these books no longer be displayed, insinuating very strongly that if they continued to sell those books, they would be subject to all kinds of zoning harassment, all kinds of other forms of pressure. And the book publishers sued the state of Rhode Island officials. And this was exactly the argument. The state of Rhode Island and their officials said, we haven't violated the Constitution. We didn't force the bookstore to stop selling books. We didn't do that at all. And the argument of the publisher was they didn't directly censor, but they made very clear that if the bookstores didn't stop carrying our books, they would pay a price through government retaliation. And that was brought to the Supreme Court that had to decide that question. Does the First Amendment, is it violated when state officials don't directly censor, but make clear that they better start censoring for them or they're going to suffer punishments? And the Supreme Court had no problem answering this question. This is what the majority said. But it is contended by the state of Rhode Island, these salutary principles of the First Amendment have no application to the activities of the Rhode Island Commission because it does not regulate or suppress obscenity, but simply exhorts booksellers and advises them of their legal rights. That was the argument by these state officials. We're not censoring anybody. We're just advising them, suggesting to them what it would be in their interest to do, namely stop selling the books. The court said, this contention premised on the commission's want of power to apply formal legal sanctions is untenable. It is true, the court said, that appellants' books have not been seized or banned by the state, and that no one has been prosecuted for their possession or sale. But though the commission is limited to informal sanctions, the threat of invoking legal sanctions and other means of coercion, persuasion, and intimidation, the record amply demonstrates that the commission deliberately set out to achieve the suppression of publications deemed, quote, objectionable, and succeeded in its aim. They got the books that they wanted banned by implicitly winking and nodding that the bookstore would pay a price if they didn't. The court went on. These acts and practices directly and designedly stopped the circulation of publication in many parts of Rhode Island. It is true, as noted by the Supreme Court, that Silverstein, the bookstore owner, was, quote, free to ignore the commission's notices, in the sense that his refusal to, quote, cooperate would have violated no law. But it was found as a fact, and the finding, being amply supported by the record, binds us, that the bookstore's compliance with the commission's directives was not really voluntary. People do not lightly disregard public officials' thinly veiled threats to institute criminal proceedings against them if they do not come around. And Silverstein's reaction, according to uncontroverted testimony, was no exception to this rule. The court went on. The commission's notices, phrased virtually as orders, reasonably understood to be such by the book distributor, invariably followed up by police visitations, in fact stopped the circulation of the listed publications ex proprio vigore, which is a Latin phrase meaning of its own force. It would be naive to credit the state's assertion that these blacklists are in the nature of mere legal advice when they plainly serve as instruments of regulation independent of laws against obscenity. The court concluded, their operation was in fact a scheme of state censorship effectuated by extra-legal sanctions. They acted as an agency not to advise, but to suppress. So when Jen Psaki says, we're very happy with what Spotify did toward Joe Rogan, but we want more. When Ed Markey says, our anger with you is not that you're censoring too much, but that you're not censoring enough. When AOC says, hey, Google and Apple and Amazon, what are you doing about this app I don't like? I think you need to get rid of it. And then they do. When Democratic-led committees subpoena tech executives over and over and over and tell them explicitly with increasing amounts of vehemence, if you don't start doing what you said you would do, namely censoring more as we want, you're going to pay a legal and retaliatory price. That becomes what the Supreme Court in Bantam Books in 1963 called a scheme of state censorship effectuated by extra-legal sanctions. They're acting as an agency not to advise but to suppress, and the First Amendment is violated.